Hello everybody, welcome to part 1 of Protection of Migratory Wildlife. I will be talking about the history leading up to the Migratory Bird Treaty Act of 1918. So some of the objectives we're going to cover today in part 1 is some important migratory species within the U.S., as well as the conservation awakening that had occurred. We're also going to cover the Migratory Bird Treaty Act of 1918 as well. And we're going to, of course, cover the implications of the Migratory Bird Treaty Act. And then, of course, we need to discuss the lead poisoning that has occurred and will continue to occur with the migratory species that the Bird Treaty Act protects. So the first species we're going to be talking about is the great egret, which everyone might be familiar with as the symbol of the National Audubon Society. So before federal protection, the populations of the great egrets had dropped to the thousands, but now after federal protections, these guys have rebounded to more than 9 million, and now in recent years, they are now in Northern Europe. They were previously in Southern Europe, but now their pair is currently in Northern Europe, which is incredible. To the left of the image of this lovely adult and their nestling, we have a map from the Audubon Society. This range map is not the greatest, but they are found across all of America. Where there is water, there is a possibility of seeing a great egret. They have no preference for saltwater or freshwater, and they do colonize and build their nests in trees. When it comes to nesting, these guys are typically monogamous, and the male is the one who usually builds the nest as well. Both male and female is usually white, and both also exhibit the nice beautiful yellow beak, and on average both male and female are 3 to 4 feet tall, so these guys are pretty big. And that is the great egret for you guys. So the next bird we're going to talk about is the snowy egret. So before federal protections, snowy egrets were known for their beautiful plumes that grew in before mating season, which are these lovely mohawk-looking feathers on their heads. And people would hunt these lovely marsh-treading birds specifically for those feathers. These guys also, around their beaks, the yellow portions of their beak would have a red hue that would come in as well. So they would also be hunted for those before their federal protections were established as well. And they also had a green tint. Well, they currently still have that green tint to their feet that people would also hunt them for as well. But as we see here on this map that I have, also from the Audubon Society, these guys have rebounded beautifully. There is now more than 2 million. These guys prefer marshy areas. They do nest in trees as well, but they are also known to nest on grounded areas such as shrubs and any marshy area. They also have expanded outward and beyond their historical range from prior to their federal protection as well. So, which is amazing. So one species I do want to talk about is the passenger pigeon. I know we have touched on them before, but I just want to go a little bit more in depth about these guys again. So here I have this range map for you guys along with the link. This map is also hyperlinked, and down in the literature cited slides I do also have the full citation for you guys as well. This slide map is also interactive and is based on confirmed sightings based on these guys. and it is from the mid-late 1500s all the way to the last living passenger pigeon sighting. So to start off, before colonials came over to the Americas, the indigenous tribes of America had a sustainable relationship with the passenger pigeon. They not only used them for sustainable use for eating and hunting, they also had a spiritual relationship where they would use them as game and spiritual use practices. But when the colonials came over and established themselves, they also used them for hunting for sustenance, but because of the black masses and how easy it was to hunt the passenger pigeon, it then became more than sustenance, so to speak. And not only was it a game that they made it to be, and was it not only just a game, it became fashion. These birds were very beautiful. So it was fashion and it was practice for children, and it became fun, and it was just everything more than sustenance in any shape, way, and possible that you can think of. Now, there were efforts for conservation, legislation for the protection of passenger pigeons were put forth early before the Weeks McLean Act was even put forth. However, efforts were shot down, so to say, when the blackening out of the sky by the mobs of the passenger pigeon were still around, but it was noticeable by some that it was less and less, so to speak. But due to the sheer number still around, people and judges would still go, oh, this is still not a problem, and would just push and brush it off. So unfortunately, by the time federal legislation had been enacted, it was unfortunately too late for the passenger pigeon to rebound from this disaster. There were efforts by private people and owners to revive them. However, the captive passenger pigeons they had were unfruitful in being able to be bred successfully, and they did not survive. So the next bird we're going to talk about is probably arguably one of the most iconic species in the US, the wood duck. So prior to federal protections, the wood ducks were one of the ones who suffered the most, not only due to hunting for their beautiful, lovely colors, but also due to deforestation due to the rampant logging, unfortunately, at the time. Their numbers plummeted, unfortunately. They are one of the few ducks that rely on tree perching. They nest within trees near swampy and wetland areas, which makes them very unique. So they rely on trees in order to nest and repopulate, which made the deforestation aspect very, very critical in order for them to be able to reproduce and survive. Here I have a map from the IUCN Red List from 2020. By the 1930s, they have successfully rebounded due to artificial nesting boxes. We have found that by building nest boxes for these ducks, wood ducks absolutely love these things, and now there are about 3.5 million in population of these guys, and they have expanded and are of least concern, and they're doing very well. Deforestation continues to be a little bit of a problem for these guys. Hunting, not quite as much. but they have expanded past their historical range, comparatively so, to the 1800s range, thankfully. But yes, these guys are doing great, and we continue to this day use artificial nesting boxes for these guys. The last bird we're going to be talking about is the trumpeter swan, which is another iconic bird for America. It is the largest native North American bird, weighing up to 30 pounds and up to 5 feet tall. They're incredibly large, with a wingspan of up to 6 feet as well. So over here on the left, we have a map from 1955, courtesy of the Trumpeter Swan Society, which was founded to protect the trumpeter swan and conserve the trumpeter swan. Please note that this map has a historic range written on it, and this is a map from 1955. This is really important when comparing it to the IUCN Red List map I have from 2020 with the current most up-to-date range that I could find. So as we can see, the range of the current range that we have is much smaller than in comparison to the historic range that 1955 says that the historic range from 1955 says that the historic range was. That was a lot of historics in one sentence. I hope that made sense. The historic of the historic. So before federal protections, the trumpeter swan had unfortunately seen a lot of popularity in hunting due to being so iconic, due to its height and weight class. As we can see, its iconic shape with its trumpet-like nose and black beak. These were also a fashion statement bird. They were once all the way down from Mexico, almost all the way up through Alaska. The trumpeter swan was a very well-known bird. They bottlenecked in population. There were fewer than 100 by 1930 and were expected to go extinct. However, now they're of least concern with approximately 50,000 in population. So they have rebounded. However, they are nowhere near their historic range, but they are currently expanding, which is good news. And just for a little tidbit on how iconic the trumpeter swan is, our favorite Charlotte's Web author E.B. White wrote a book about trumpeter swan, The Trumpet of the Swan, just to highlight just how iconic of a bird the trumpeter swan is to American history and culture, as well to the Americas in general. So the trumpeter swan does play a huge role in American history and society. Now we're going to go over a few national societies that were founded to help protect some migratory species. So the first, of course, we're going to talk about is the National Audubon Society. They were established in 1905, and of course we have talked a lot about them in past lectures. However, we're going to talk a little bit more about these guys. So the Audubon Society was founded by two women who were heavily opposed to feather usage in fashion. So this was often referred to as millinery murder, which is the killing of birds, specifically to use in hat fashion. Millinery is the hat making process. So millinery murder was in reference to the killing of birds for hat making. So not only was Audubon made by women for women and established to protect birds against bird-based fashion, they helped Frank Chapman push for the Christmas bird count establishment and made it popularized as well. So they backed the Christmas bird count and pushed aside the Christmas side hunt. So next up is the American Ornithological Union, founded in 1883 by a handful of men in a museum, actually. This is one of the world's oldest union and societies in North America. They actually created the checklist of North American birds, which is still in use today. They founded this union to advance ornithological science out of concern of the decline in migratory bird species and overall the populations of birds in America. And one thing to note, their early efforts actually aided in the push for the creation of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife. So next up is one of the more iconic that we've also talked about before is the Boone and Crockett Club of 1887 with President Roosevelt heading the club as well. That we have talked about him plenty of times before. While not strictly dedicated to migratory species of birds, I wanted to discuss Boone and Crockett specifically because they were the first to address wildlife population declines, mainly in big game. And without addressing big game, there would not have been such a major push towards birds as well. And they also pioneered the fair chase common sense amongst hunters. And they also supported organizations like the Audubon Society and the Trumpeter Swan Societies, which was very important to have that backing, especially with people like President Roosevelt in these types of clubs to have. They also initiated for legislations to establish the national parks and forests and the legislations like the Migratory Bird Treaty Act that we have today, which protects the birds and even the big game species that we have today. Lastly, I would like to talk about the Campfire Club of America, founded in 1897. While not founded initially to protect migratory species, they were founded to act as not a high-level society that you had to join as an exclusive high-level member of society, but rather as someone who had camped and hunted. They had members of high-level people in society, such as President Roosevelt, who was a member. And the picture over here, this is actually a membership card detailing the requirements. They had people who were artists and conservationists, and in 1909, they actually declared publicly that they would advocate conservation and actively focused from being campfire storytellers to we are actively going to turn our focus to fighting for conservation rights for migratory species, especially birds, and push for the Migratory Bird Treaty Act. And now they are an exclusive private club, and they are now called the Campfire Conservation Fund, and they are again exclusive. So again, the Campfire Club of America was open to all. This was a club, a national club that was made to be accessible of people of all levels of society, that became a society open to conversation and advocated for conservation eventually. And that was then their end goal and is now exclusively for conservation. So just to highlight a couple of more clubs for you guys. Ducks Unlimited was founded in 1937 after the Migratory Bird Treaty Act, of course, had passed, and they were founded after the Great Depression had hit and during the Dust Bowl drought to restore habitat devastated by the drought, and they had been founded to restore said habitat for waterfowl in the US and Canada. Many of you guys might know this brand, especially if you guys are avid hunters, and you guys are still a club, not just a brand, so you guys can actively join their conservation movement that these guys have going as well, and they actively still work with conservationists to promote waterfowl conservation and habitat protection. Up next is the Winus Point Shooting Club, founded in 1856. They are the oldest continuously operating waterfowl hunting club. They are incredibly ancient, one would say. They're also known as the first to hire a wildlife biologist in the private shooting club for waterfowl. And they also fund a lot of research, which is incredible. It's not very popular, especially during the time frame in which they were founded for this to occur. They also put out a lot of research. They're a very private club, but they are very, very forthcoming when it comes to conservation. And just as an honorable mention for you guys to understand, private clubs, public clubs, they are on all levels of state, local, federal, national. The Delaware Valley Ornithological Club, founded in 1890. These guys are also very old. This is a local public club. If you live in Delaware, you guys can still join these guys. They are still around. They fund internships, they do bird walks, they educate the public, and they advocate for conservation. These guys were founded to advocate for waterfowl conservation and all kinds of birds. So just a little tidbit in there, while not a hunting club, it just goes to show that you can join any club, and these guys have been around forever. So these clubs, some clubs are very old and are still around at every level you can find, from local all the way to the national level. Alright, so we're going to talk a little bit more about Teddy Roosevelt, who we talked a lot about. First, we're going to start off with a nice little quote for you guys from him. "It is also vandalism, wantonly to destroy or to permit the destruction of what is beautiful in nature, whether it be a cliff, a forest, or a species of mammal or bird. Here in the United States, we turn our rivers and streams into sewers and dumping grounds. We pollute the air, we destroy forests, and exterminate fishes, birds, and mammals. Not to speak of vulgarizing charming landscapes with hideous advertisements, but at last it looks as if our people were awakening." So President Roosevelt had many accomplishments in protecting migratory species and more, including creating the U.S. Forest Service. He also had the achievement of creating midnight forests in March of 1907, when Congress wanted to put a stop to the presidential power of creating more national forests. And in doing so, towards the end of his presidency, he added 16 million acres of national forest in the stroke of midnight. Well, not quite literally so, but in doing so, Gifford Pinchot and himself had expanded 11 national forests and created 21 new forests, which are dubbed midnight forests. And this picture here, Rio Grande National Forest, is just one of the 21 new national forests and the 11 expanded that he added to these midnight forests. And not only did he do that as well with the National Forest, he also created the first bird refuge, as we talked about, called Pelican Island. And on top of that, in total, he created 51 bird refuges. He also created many national parks and monuments as well, which added to the total of protected lands. In total, by the end of President Roosevelt's presidency, in all of his terms, both terms, he protected approximately 230 million acres of land. So that's pretty impressive. That is a lot of land that he was able to secure for land management on a federal scale for all species. And like previously mentioned, he was also in several clubs that also advocated and pushed for legislation and acts, which later turned into things like the Weeks-McLean Act of 1916 and then the Migratory Bird Treaty Act of 1918. All right, so now we're going to talk about the Migratory Bird Treaty Act of 1918 itself, which first began as a convention between the US and Canada in 1916. On the last slide I said the Weeks-McLean Act was in 1916, but I was thinking of the convention when I first said that. The Weeks-McLean Act was in 1913. So the convention between the US and Canada was initially started to allow for the creation of the Migratory Bird Treaty Act to be created, which was to initially replace the Weeks-McLean Act. The Weeks-McLean Act of 1913 was initially too weak due to what it was allowed to do, which allowed the Secretary of Agriculture to restrict hunting seasons as they pleased for certain species of migratory birds as seen fit, and the importation of wild birds. Now, the Migratory Bird Treaty Act locked down and made it much tighter and more strict by making it illegal to pursue, hunt, take, capture, kill, or sell migratory bird parts without a permit. And this included the eggs, nest, feathers, or bird parts such as feet, beaks, as well, and this includes such as things as the twigs of the bird nest. Later on, conventions were added to include other countries such as Mexico and Russia. Each convention was added individually for each country that was added in later years as well. And this screenshot I have is straight from the EPA website, and if anyone is interested in reading this as well. And this is the implications of if one were to break the Migratory Bird Treaty Act. So to try and simplify this for you guys, the easy way to make this for you guys is a felony includes taking, which includes killing and selling the bird to anyone. So this includes the intent to sell as well. So killing or selling a migratory bird that is protected by the Treaty Act is counted as a felony. Anything other is a misdemeanor. So there are two ways to categorize an individual when it comes to the misdemeanor or felony. You're either categorized as an individual or associated with a company or the company itself. So as an individual with a misdemeanor, you'll either be fined $5,000 up to $5,000 or and imprisoned up to 6 months. Now, if you're a company, you're fined only up to $10,000 or just straight $10,000. Usually you are maxed out at $10,000 as an organization. Now for the felony offense, as an individual, you are maxed fined $250,000 and imprisoned up to 2 years as the individual. But as an organization, the max fine is $100,000, and that is for each violation that you're found guilty of. And that also includes everything used to take or use in bartering or the selling of. So your nets, traps, and equipment, including all the hobbies you were associated with, will also be confiscated, and you have to vow under oath that you will no longer pursue your hobbies as well. So the implications are very, very strict. But it's been proven the strictness works because as of 2020, the total species count has gone down as of who is protected under the Act. As of 2020, 1,093 migratory birds are protected now, so that count has gone down. So now we're going to review some implications with some example violations. First up, we're going to go over Encana Oil and Gas Incorporated, located in Denver, Colorado. They had encountered approximately 55 protected bird deaths between two states, in Colorado and Wyoming. These bird deaths were across several different species, and what happened was these birds got trapped in uncovered gas reserve pits. The company pleaded guilty on 2 counts. The counts were due to this occurring in both states. The fine was $15,000 each for both counts, so it was a total of $30,000. So they also had to pay an extra $170,000 in community service payments due to them being unable to do community service as an organization. They also had to do an environmental compliance plan designed to keep the birds away from coming into contact with the oily waters in the reserve pits. So that means they had to come up with a way to cover their uncovered reserve pits to prevent the migratory birds from coming in contact with the reserve pits once again. So this next one I have is a little bit lengthy. It's Thomas Kaputsa and Adam Bugowski in Long Island, New York. This involved red-tailed and Cooper's hawks being taken. What had occurred was these two owners were owners of racing pigeons in Long Island, and they had taken these two species specifically to protect their racing pigeons. So Kaputsa had pleaded guilty to 1 count of conspiracy to take, capture, and kill, and 4 counts of taking, capturing, and killing as well. So he got 1 year probation and $5,500 in fines. He also had to do 90 hours of community service at a local animal shelter. Bogowski had pleaded guilty to 1 count of conspiracy to take, capture, and kill, as well as 2 counts of taking, capturing, and killing as well. He also had to do some community service at a local animal shelter as well. So he had 1 year probation, a $250 fine, and his community service was 60 hours. So Bogowski was sentenced a year after Kaputsa was. So here we can see the difference between how a corporation versus individuals are fined. As we can see, the individuals it looks a little more intense versus the corporation. But the money-wise, as we can see, the corporation has long-term financially. It might be a little more have more of a financial impact. But as far as the individuals, they had to both give up pigeon racing as well as surrender their pigeons, and they also can no longer pursue pigeons as well. There also is no documentation as to how many red-tailed and Cooper's hawks these two individuals had taken the lives of. That number was undetermined from what I could find, unfortunately. But as we can see, the Migratory Bird Treaty Act is very strict, but that is very necessary in order to keep the populations thriving and continuously growing to protect these species that we have. So the last thing we're going to be talking about is lead poisoning in migratory species protected by the Migratory Bird Treaty Act. Now, the first thing you're going to assume is the biggest contributing factor is going to be pesticides of lead poisoning. For example, like mercury would often come from pesticides. However, the biggest contributing factor is lead shots / ammunition. So it is not pesticides. Another factor is things like construction and the industry, such as mining and infrastructure building. So how would lead poisoning occur? Is so when a person would spend a round, the lead casing or shell or even the ammunition that was spent would leave behind pieces of itself, right? And birds would pick it up and confuse it for food, and therefore they would ingest the round or the casing. And in that case, it would eventually lead to lead poisoning, and subsequently the bird would then die. So then one would then ask the question, if one would take someone to court, if a bird would be found dead, and they found said hunter whose casing killed said bird, and would accuse the hunter of breaking the Migratory Bird Treaty Act, would that be upheld in court? The answer is simply no. It is found that accidental killing of bird species protected by the Act is not to be upheld in court. Negligence, however, can be upheld in court, as we saw on the previous slide with the oil company, as we saw. So the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service in 1987 used their foothold and power as a federal agency and the Migratory Bird Act to begin their process of banning lead shot. And by 1991, they officially implemented the banning of lead shot against waterfowl and coots only, so not big game or any other migratory birds or game birds not protected by the Migratory Bird Treaty Act. So any shots or ammunition used for waterfowl and coot must be non-toxic within the U.S. And by 2013, there are alternatives approved, such as copper and aluminum. And there are a few others as well that have been approved since, that included big game ammunitions as well. So things like bison, deer, elk, moose, they have also been approved to use others as well outside of lead. And that was a great step up. As of 2018, 34 states have banned lead ammunition in totality. So they are able to use these alternatively approved ammunitions overall to use in their hunting. And another aspect to this is tackle. So when you go fishing, bird will also eat the pieces that will break off of tackle. So your fishing lures, if they're made of lead, bird will also eat the bits and pieces of your fishing lures and such that will break off if they're made of lead. That is another way that they can get lead poisoning as well. So being conscientious of what type of fishing lures people are using and what they're made out of is very important, as fishing tackle is not one of those things that has been explored, and trying to find alternatives yet for and implementing as well. So far, the only thing states have only on the federal level as well has been being pushed for alternatives and banning is ammunition, and not on the fishing side of the world as tackle has so far. The side that has done the most damage to the migratory world is ammunition rather than tackle, but so far we're seeing a higher rate of deaths now is from the fishing side of the world, leaving lead in the water. And so that is the lead poisoning side of things. All right, just a quick review for part one, just to remember, multiple species of birds did play an important role in the conservation awareness before the Migratory Bird Treaty Act was passed in 1918, not just the ones that we did cover. There are national societies and local clubs that formed to support sustainable hunting of game species in their habitats, and some of these clubs did push for big game, and without these pushing of the big game, we would not have seen the push for the migratory birds protection as well. And then we have President Roosevelt and his party, so Gifford Pinchot and all, annexed the first of many wildlife refuges and added thousands of acres of forests, which then benefited all of wildlife, and many of which was the migratory birds. And then the Migratory Bird Treaty Act protected migratory birds and their parts with very harsh penalties, which are currently still in force, and has successfully allowed the populations of critically endangered species to recover, which we have seen in our earlier slides. And lead poisoning has garnered concern and led to the changes to federal hunting policies, and continues to do so. So these are just some things to keep in mind and to take away.
Hello, my name is Davis Grubb, and I will be taking over from Brianne. And today I'm going to be talking about the creation of the Migratory Bird Conservation Commission and the laws and regulations made to protect and preserve migratory birds in the United States. One of the most important parts about conservation is creating a legal framework in which land and animals can be protected for future generations to enjoy. And most of what I will be talking about involves the laws around waterfowl and the hunting of them in the United States. The Migratory Bird Conservation Commission, or the MBCC, was created in 1929 to oversee and regulate the migratory birds and their habitats within the United States. At the time, there had been numerous pieces of legislation passed in the United States to regulate hunting, specifically the hunting of game birds and waterfowl. One of the first pieces of legislation made to protect birds in the U.S. was the Lacey Act, which we have gone over already, but as a refresher, the Lacey Act forbade the selling of poached animal parts across state borders. Specifically, it was passed to curtail the hunting of birds for their plumage, which led to the extinction of the Carolina parakeet and had devastated several other bird populations. Another landmark piece of legislation was the North American Migratory Bird Treaty Act. It was a treaty between the U.S. and Canada, then part of Britain, which regulate hunting across national boundaries. Yet despite legislation being passed to regulate hunting, waterfowl populations still were on the decline. The problem? It was the bird's habitat that was under threat. That's why the MBCC was created, to help preserve and create habitat for waterfowl, namely ducks. The MBCC's main job is to scout for land for the Department of Interior that would be beneficial to migratory birds. This mostly meant at the time protecting wetland habitats used by migratory waterfowl, as I said, namely ducks. The MBCC also incorporates private land as part of its conservation efforts, raising grant money for private entities to create waterfowl habitat. So the MBCC works with a lot of organizations Brianne previously talks about, like Ducks Unlimited or the Audubon Society. This is great as it opens a lot of areas that are not publicly available to being conserved, especially as a good share of wetland habitats happen to be on the already heavily developed East Coast. After the creation of the Migratory Bird Conservation Commission, the government ran into a major problem. They did not have any money to fund it. As this was at the beginning of the Great Depression, most government funds were already spread thin, so waterfowl and wetlands conservation became a low priority. The duck stamp sought to curb this problem by raising funds from the people who hunt waterfowl. In 1934, 5 years after the creation of the MBCC, the Migratory Bird Hunting and Conservation Stamp Act, aka the Duck Stamp Act, was passed. Duck stamps are essentially taxes levied at bird hunters, the new law requiring the purchase of duck stamps to participate in duck hunting season. Still in use today, the duck stamp is one of the most successful conservation fundraisers and is a major revenue generator for wetlands preservation in America. Duck stamps sales alone generating over $40 million in revenue last year and is the main provider of funds for the Migratory Bird Conservation Commission. Duck stamps have also become an essential part of American culture and the arts. The design of the first duck stamp was done by renowned painter and conservationist Ding Darling, the design seen here. Since 1949, the designs of duck stamps have been open to the public, where regular people can submit designs and vote for them, with the winner becoming the duck stamp for the next season. The designs have opened up a market for collectors, which help generate additional revenue for conservation efforts. The Bald Eagle Protection Act is a self-explanatory piece of legislation. The bald eagle is one of the most recognizable American birds and has been a symbol of the United States since its founding. Despite the reverence that people hold for the bird, its numbers had been sharply declining throughout the continental U.S. during the early 1900s. This act sought to curb the decline by forbidding the hunting, removal, and/or relocation of the bird's nest, as well as forbid the possession of eagle feathers and making it a federal offense. The Bald Eagle Protection Act is one of the first environmental laws drafted to protect a single species, and it was successful as the population of bald eagles began to recover soon after its passing. In 1962, the law was amended to include the golden eagle as well, another important predatory bird species and the national bird of Mexico. In fact, it is the bird on the emblem of the Mexican flag. The extension to the golden eagle helped erase some loopholes with the possession of eagle feathers and other parts, as well as prevent accidental shootings of juvenile bald eagles, which look remarkably like the golden eagle. While the act had some early success in population recovery, by the mid-1960s it was clear that hunting was not the main driver of the bird's decline, as the population had shrunk to a staggeringly low 487 nesting pairs. The cause of the decline was the overuse of the pesticide DDT. As DDT leached into rivers and streams and into insects that fish were eating, and as the eagles ate infected fish, the chemical bioaccumulated in them, which resulted in the birds laying eggs with weak shells that failed to hatch. DDT was identified as the primary cause, and the public was made aware of it through works like Rachel Carson's Silent Spring, and DDT was banned in 1972 for commercial use. With the ban of DDT, eagle populations began to recover. In 1994, the act was amended to allow some usage of feathers for Native American tribes. Eagle feathers featured prominently in several tribal cultures and religious ceremonies, and the act was seen as an attack on their traditional culture. Now Native Americans can collect eagle feathers with a permit, but hunting is still forbidden. In 2007, the bald eagle was officially delisted from the list of endangered species, from less than 500 nesting pairs in the 1960s to over 70,000 pairs today. The recovery of the bald eagle is one of the most successful conservation programs in the United States history, and should be seen as a landmark case for all bird species and all other species going forward. The North American Wetlands Conservation Act helped broaden the protection of wetlands, the primary habitat of waterfowl. Signed into law in 1989, the Wetlands Conservation Act aimed to create grants to establish, enhance, restore, and manage wetland habitats used by waterfowl, not only in the United States, but in Canada and Mexico as well. As the Wetlands Conservation Act is a grant program, it works with private landowners and organizations to enhance wetland habitat. It does this by providing money for projects done by private entities, by usually matching the funds that the private org has raised. It should be noted federal funds cannot be more than 50% of the total funds used in these wetland projects, as the goal is to take a much more supportive role. The Wetlands Conservation Act also requires that 50% of all the allotted grant money go to projects in Canada and Mexico. This expands on a precedent set by a much older piece of legislation, the North American Migratory Bird Treaty Act, that was signed by Canada, then part of the UK, in which the US agreed to regulate hunting of migratory birds alongside Canada. This reflects the reality of bird migration, which is that birds frankly do not care about political boundaries and very much are going to cross borders. What the Wetlands Conservation Act does is address the habitat portion of migratory birds, while the treaty acts that mainly regulate hunting between countries. The Waterfowl Management Plan was created in 1986 as a joint venture between Canada and the United States to conserve waterfowl, and then expanded to include Mexico after a few years. Like the Wetlands Conservation Act, but its scope was aimed at helping local areas establish wetland habitats for migratory birds to use. The management plan identifies areas that are optimal for waterfowl breeding and/or stopovers. This works similar to the Wetlands Conservation Act in practice, and that is essentially a grant-given act in which private landowners and private organizations will receive grants to help establish wetlands habitats on lands they own. But it does have much more focus on Mexico and Canada compared to the Wetlands Conservation Act. But as I've said, they're very similar in what they do, what they scope, and there's a lot of overlap. Yeah. Now we will look at the Neotropical Bird Act, another major amendment. The Neotropical Bird Act was passed in 2002, and it addresses an overlooked area of bird conservation, that of neotropical migratory birds. So first, let's define what the neotropics are, because it's not a widely used term. Neo, of course, meaning new, and in this case referring to the New World, the Americas. So the term is used to differentiate from the tropics of the Old World and Africa and Eurasia. So basically we are talking about birds that migrate from North America to South America and Central America. As we know, birds do not respect borders and can often travel great distances, including from way down south. Neotropical birds are defined as birds that live either full-time or part-time in Central and South America and/or the Caribbean. Similar to the Wetlands Conservation Act, 75% of the funding for grants given go to foreign countries rather than for protection of habitat in the United States. This is very helpful as many of these countries do not have the capacity necessary to create or maintain wetlands habitats for migratory birds within their borders. Many of these birds and habitats were neglected by the FWS for a long time, since many of them were not desirable game species and mostly included songbirds and waterfowl, not usually targeted by hunters. Instead, many neotropical species have ecological and aesthetic value rather than commercial value that game species possess. The Harvest Information Program is one of the most important surveying tools used by the Migratory Bird Conservation Commission. Established in 1992 by the FWS, the program is used to estimate the number of waterfowl harvested each year by hunters. When a duck hunter registers to hunt for the season, there is a roughly 5% chance they will be added to the program. This usually means they will need to answer a questionnaire that details the amount of birds they shot as well as where they hunted. This is a fairly standard sampling method, but the data collected is crucial for estimating not only the number of waterfowl hunted, but also for estimating the total population of waterfowl. As waterfowl and other migratory birds are always seemingly on the move, or so spread out over the North American continent, it can be very tricky to collect data on them. The Harvest Information Program helps solve this problem by turning duck hunters into researchers, gathering data, recruiting well over 50,000 people each season to contribute their findings. Collecting accurate data is important for conservation projects, as it is necessary to look at when allocating funds to projects as well as aid in scientific research. A decline in a group of hunters takes in a certain area might, for example, point towards habitat decline, poaching, or any hosts of other problems that might need to be addressed ASAP. While a strong year in another area might point to the opposite of that. With data taken from the HIP program, the FWS can adjust how much a hunter would be allowed to take to help wax and wane waterfowl populations as needed. It is such an important program that I'm honestly surprised that it was only created so late in the MBCC's creation. Its data collection programs are standard for most scientific endeavors, and the information they gather is so important for these initiatives to succeed. The management of waterfowl and the protection of wetlands has been one of the biggest conservation success stories in the history of the United States. As you can see by the chart below, wetlands are one of the few natural biomes actually expanding in land area in the United States compared to plains, prairies, woodlands, which are all in decline. This is because the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service creates a lot of wetland habitats for birds. In fact, 2 years ago, I visited one of these sites in the Uwharrie National Forest here in North Carolina. So what they do is they usually flood a corn, soybean field, just whatever crop field during the winter to create what is effectively overwintering or stopover habitat for these migratory birds. The time I went there, there were probably well over 5,000 individual ducks and was probably only a 100-acre plot. And when there are ducks, there are also a whole lot of other species. There's thousands of martins, thousands of songbirds. There are a lot of predatory birds. There are bald eagles that were on the peripheries, just creating these basically stopover spots for the ducks are just amazing ecosystem service. Now, these areas are not open to the public or to hunters. I went with a conservation group with special permission to view the area. Major areas for conservation are also still being added. Last year, a staggering 22,000 acres of wetland habitat was created and or preserved last year. There's also other major reasons why wetlands are being protected over other biomes, and it's mainly due to changes in zoning laws, and that wetlands are prone to flooding, so they tend to not be great places to live in and or build. This has allowed ducks and other waterfowl to comfortably make their homes near and in urban environments that would not typically be what we think such species would live in. The result of wetlands conservation has made it so waterfowl are some of the few types of birds whose populations have actually increased in the last few decades, while most other bird types are unfortunately in the decline. So to end my part of the presentation, I'm just going to summarize everything I've went over. So basically, first off, start off with the Migratory Bird Conservation Commission, which was established in 1929. That's basically what oversees a good majority of what we talk about. They're looking at protecting mostly waterfowl, mostly game animals that hunters want to hunt. The Duck Stamp Act was passed soon after. That's basically puts a tax on duck hunting through the sale of duck stamps. That's actually what funds the Migratory Bird Conservation Commission. The Bald Eagle Protection Act, passed in 1940, protects bald eagles, which are the U.S. national symbol. But do remember the history of bald eagles is also interlinked with usage of DDT and basically deterioration of habitat for chemicals. That was one of the first big environmental pushes, was the ban on DDT for domestic use. That's actually important because DDT was still used by the government for things like malaria control even after the act was passed. North American Waterfowl Management Plan. It's simple. It and the Wetlands Conservation Act can sort of be lumped up together because they function pretty similarly, in which they're initiatives done between the U.S., Canada to protect wetlands habitats for migratory waterfowl mostly. Neotropical Migratory Bird Act, the most recent basically initiative to migratory birds. That's focusing on a lot of neglected songbird species, a lot of species that aren't really hunted but have a lot of aesthetic value, a lot of ecological value. It's going to be like your cranes, your storks, basically a lot of tropical birds. Harvest Information Program, that's a survey done of duck hunting, and it's used to estimate the population of waterfowl in the United States and just basically Americas in general, as they are migratory. And then remember how wetlands management is done. So remember, it is done through a lot of habitat restoration, a lot of habitat preservation, and that has been very successful, as I've talked about. Wetlands habitat is one of the few wild habitats that is expanding, actually, and it's looking to continue that way. It's got bipartisan support. One of the few things I do, because left-wing people prefer it for the environmental conservation parts of it. A lot of right-wing people are hunting on it, so they like it for that. But just yeah, so that's just a quick run through of everything I talked about. So yeah, thank you so much for watching the presentation. Thank you to Brianne. She's done a great job as well. And yeah, just thank you for watching.